Welcome back to the Ohio MMA podcast. I am your host, David McKinney. Joining me on today's episode is Matt Comer. How's it going, Matt?
I'm doing fantastic, Dave. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's getting hot outside. It's summer. It's crazy. This is the time that I like to get outside and sweat, and I'm already sweating just sitting here in my studio. Yeah, man, it's been going well. I know you're getting ready for your 10th pro fight, man, coming up in a couple of weeks at Ego Fight Series. How you feeling? How's training going for that?
Speaking of training in summer and sweat, it's the perfect time of year to take a fight because it is starting to get hot, so it makes cutting the weight really easy. Um, Training's going well. It's hot in the gym. We got good guys in there. I'm feeling sharp, in all areas. I'm healthy. Life is good. Half of this is, managing your life outside of fighting, and life is good. So I can't complain, man. Everything's good.
Yeah. So where are you doing most of your training? Are you at Demolition, or is that your base, or where do you do most of your training at?
Most of my MMA training I'm doing at Demolition. And then I actually, Demolition's in Findlay. I live in Columbus, so it's kind of a drive. So I get my jiu-jitsu in Columbus. My home base is JITS 56. And, I train in Powell for jiu-jitsu, and then I zip up to Demolition for my MMA work.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's so many fighters coming out of Demolition. I feel like every fight card, it seems like a handful of new guys, Gary Young and crew are putting out there. And I know you're one of the veterans, and putting guys in the UFC like Dylan Budka, and there just seems to be, like I said, so many fighters and all levels from day one guys and girls to to 10 fight pro veterans and guys who are in the UFC, which is crazy. Do you feel that when you go into the gym of like just the I guess spectrum of experience levels at Demolition?
Absolutely. Demolition's a really unique place. And it's place that's really special to me because, earlier in my pro career, I hit a skid and was really thinking about hanging him up and talked to a lot of people about hanging him up. And, I'm loyal to Demolition because Gary was the one person who encouraged me to continue and do things the right way, and helped me kind of figure out how to get back on track. So I definitely feel like I'm back on track, and I'm forever grateful for that. When I'm in the gym, it's I've been there so long now. A lot of the guys that I started doing this with don't compete and don't train anymore. So it's all young people. It makes me feel young because there are all experience levels. There's a good crop of pros now that are coming up. Obviously, Dylan, you mentioned, who's in the UFC now, did things the right way and got in, and he's on his way. We've got a lot of other, up and coming pros. A lot of new amateurs, like you mentioned. Every amateur card you see in the Midwest has a bunch of Demolition guys on it all the time. It's a great team. It's a fun place. We work hard. All sorts of skill sets. It's a great team.
Yeah. Let's talk about the record, because you kind of mentioned a little bit. You actually lost your first couple of pro fights and then won two. And then, as you mentioned, you did have a skid. You lost three in a row. But looking at the record, man, you fought some really tough opponents. And I feel like at being at that 205 and heavyweight, like there's not a lot of guys on the regional scene. So you're going in there in your first couple of fights and you're fighting, really well known and named guys. Like your first fight was Jesse Murray. Then you fought Aaron Bush. You fought Brad Schott, who is a veteran. You fought Bronco Busick, who is a legit guy and Bellator veteran. Do you feel like that was just kind of being? I know you had I think you had 6 amateur fights, but just a level of like a lot of the other divisions there, you can kind of build yourself up a little bit and get not easy fights, but fights that are maybe like guys that are more your level, whereas you were fighting the best of the best from day one as a pro.
Sure. Yeah. No. I try not to pay attention to my record too much, even though you have to. It's just part of the game. When I first started, like you said, I definitely have never taken an easy fight. Maybe I could have been a little bit smarter about the way that I managed that, but I always wanted the challenge. So I got in there with whoever. You mentioned the skid. Lost a couple fights, but I think from that experience, fighting these tough guys and not coming out on top, What it really showed me was, I was a former Ohio State athlete. I came out and I tried to use my athleticism. I thought that could, take me to places that it had previously in my life. And MMA just doesn't work that way. Just because I'm an athletic dude, who's in shape, explosive, all that stuff. It doesn't carry over. It does to a certain extent. Of course, obviously being athletic is never a bad thing, but I just wasn't doing things the right way. I wasn't training properly. I wasn't getting enough rounds in sparring. I wasn't getting enough rounds in on the ground. Certainly wasn't getting enough rounds in wrestling when I first started. So, I had to learn the hard way, unfortunately. It took those L's to get me to realize, hey, if you're going to get anywhere in this sport, and I don't know how long I have left, I've got to get in here and I've got to do it the right way. And so, you kind of clawing through that, scratching and clawing these last couple years. I haven't been as active as I'd like to be, but, I've had a couple wins my last couple of fights. And I definitely feel like I'm, riding the wave of doing things the right way to get this win streak going and try to, have it continue.
Yeah, we'll come back to the track to the OSU athlete part of it in a second. But I did want to mention, so you have won your last two fights in a row, 4-5. I know you had 2.5 years out of competition. It seems like a lot of fighters had layoffs during that time. Of course, there was a pandemic, and it was tough to find fights and tough to find places to train. But do you feel like you've got that momentum back now that that you've won a couple of fights and pretty dominant fashion, both first round wins? You went down to Kentucky and got back on track, but already again, you're now 8-9 months coming up, not having a fight. I know you were supposed to fight a couple weeks ago, but do you feel like you've definitely turned it around and feel like you have some momentum, even though you're maybe a little later in your career?
Absolutely. I think where I'm at now, I finally believe in myself and I'm having fun. I think that, before, I knew I had the ability, but I didn't really believe how great I could be. I'd be told that all the time, and people would pump me up saying, hey, like, you've got all these great skills, you're tall, you're fast, you're athletic, all this stuff. But I don't know that I really ever believed it, just because I didn't have a background in any of this stuff. And it was kind of learning on the job. But once I had that layoff, all I did was focus on training, and I gave myself some milestones. Like, I will not get back in there until, I feel like I've made some improvements in the areas that were really giving me trouble in past fights. And I feel like I achieved that, in the training room. And then, these last couple of opponents that I've had, obviously they're tough guys. This is professional fighting, but, maybe not the best records, but I set the bar high for how I wanted to perform, and I performed to my expectation in those fights. And so I definitely feel like, I'm back, if you want to call it that, but, I've got a lot of work to do still, and I still think I have enough time to do it. And I just want to keep, doing things the right way and winning these fights.
Yeah, and one thing I remember from early on in your career, when you came into the sport, it was always like a unique background that you had, because you see wrestlers, you see boxers, you see even football players come into the sport, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. But you're actually a sprinter, a track athlete. How did you first get involved in MMA? Coming from, of course, I'm a Buckeye, so OHIO. And I think you actually won a Big Ten championship, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I do have a couple of those in the bag.
Yeah. So, but coming from being a sprinter, how did you make that transition from being a track athlete and a sprinter to MMA?
You really don't see too many guys transition from running in a straight line to, jumping in the cage. But honestly, I never had any desire to fight in the first place. When I was in school, I'd always go to the bar to watch the UFC pay-per-views. And, I grew up watching old school boxing, so I always had an interest in watching the fights, but it was never on my bucket list or anything. Once I graduated and, I was done running, went through this phase where I tried to, find myself, not really being an athlete anymore. Wanted to find something else to get into. I tried playing volleyball, tried playing golf, tried doing all sorts of stuff that never really stuck. And then, I went to a boxing gym just kind of randomly on my own. And I just wanted to learn. I'm like, I don't want to fight. I just want to learn how to throw a proper punch and, maybe mix it up a little bit, use this as a workout. Then I moved back to Michigan for a little while. So once I moved to Michigan, I wandered into a place that offered, boxing, some striking classes, and jiu-jitsu, so I could get a little bit more of everything. But still, even at that place, was a place called Lightning Kicks in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I didn't have a desire to fight, and I kind of got talked into it. One of the guys there, they had a show coming up. It was like the gym show, that they ran, and they said, "Hey, like you should jump in there." Blah 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 blah. So I took it because I was kind of convinced to do it, and I got my ass kicked, of course, because it wasn't really something that I was focused on. But after I got in there, pride kicked in, and I'm like, you know what? I got to at least do one more of these so I can say that I won a fight, and then I'll go find something else to do. And then, my second, amateur fight up in Michigan, I was able to win that, and then that's how I got hooked.
Yeah, that's such an interesting background, and that always I feel like perked up my ears of man, don't see too many sprinters making their way to MMA, but your fight coming up June 15th at Ego Fight Series 3, you're actually fighting Tussel Conner, super tough guy, and I know one thing I saw when you posted, you're like, I'm excited for this fight because I know this guy shows up, he's prepared, and he's not going to back out, and that I feel like a lot of times in the sport is the unfortunate side of it. But talk me through the fight
Right.
and what do you think about the matchup?
It's a good matchup, obviously. I think we're going to be the co-main event for the show. Chelsea Tiny Tank Connor is going to kill it in the main event. I'm excited that I have the opportunity to jump on and set the table for her. The fight with Tussel, you pay attention to guys who are in your division. So he's somebody who, I've seen, swirling around in the rankings and some of the shows that, I haven't been on. One thing about him, he's very active. He fights all the time. So, he's going to be sharp. He's way more active than I am. So, I expect him to, come in ready to go, like you mentioned. And like I said, some guys you get booked to fight them and you sign a contract. You don't know if they're actually going to show up or not, but he's not one of those guys. He's going to be ready to fight. And, I'm ready for wherever the fight goes. I don't really have a specific game plan for this fight. I think that that's one of the things that's benefited me, these last couple of years is, I just go in trying to develop and be the best version of myself I can be because, I don't want to prepare for someone who I think is going to strike and then they come out trying to take me down. You got to be ready for everything in there. So I don't know what he's going to do. I don't care. I know what I'm going to do. And I know that I've, been, feeling comfortable in many different areas. I expect a very competitive matchup. It's going to be a great crowd because he's from that area, sort of. I believe, he's not too far from there, and I'm not too far from there either, being in Columbus. So we're both going to bring a lot of people. It's going to be a really loud, wild, live fight for the fans that they'll be able to get into. And, I'm a finisher. He's a finisher. So it's going to be fireworks.
Yeah, I know he's got 2 of his wins via knockout, and you got 2 of your wins via knockout. Or I'm sorry, that was looking at his. You've got 2 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 4 wins. So definitely don't bet on this one to go to the to the judges.
I would not.
But so the other side of it too, I know. In addition to fighting, you've also got into the fun side of the sport and promoting and signature combat sports. Tell me about how that got started. I know you did a handful of shows back, I think, before the pandemic, or a couple shows before the pandemic, and it seems like there's always that that kind of area, the Findlay, Lima, that Northwest Ohio area. There's so many fighters. It makes sense to promote up there. But how'd you get involved in that side of it?
Good question. It's been a while since I
I
thought
feel like a
about
lot of
that.
promoters ask that.
Yeah. Really at first it was a bucket list thing, to be honest. I thought I was going to be a one and done and didn't really care to do it long term. But when you invest in the things that you have to invest in to promote a show, like a cage, for example, you buy a cage, well, you can't really just use it once. Then what are you going to do with it? Besides, park it somewhere or sell it to someone else. So I'm like, okay, well, I've got the cage and I've got the infrastructure now. The thought was, my first fight was against Jesse Murray, as a pro up in Toledo. There used to be a lot going on in that Northwest, Ohio area. And once I started looking to promote, a lot of the shows and a lot of the gyms in Northwest Ohio just kind of disappeared. So there were, guys who were looking to fight and guys who were active, up in that area, but there was nothing really going on. One of the promotions that I've fought for and really respect, IT Fight Series, Scott Sheely's old show, he had kind of slowed down on, putting shows together. So I figured that there was an opportunity to get something going kind of in that area because, there's other, great shows in Columbus, excuse me, in Ohio that dominate other markets. You got Ohio Combat League in Columbus. You've got Cage Thunder in Northeast Ohio, Made Men, some of these other shows. And so I figured that the Western Ohio, particularly the Northwest, was an area that, could use a solid promotion that, does shows somewhat consistently, because I don't promote shows all the time, but I do a few shows a year. That was really the thought when I started. And then, being on the fighter side of it, I understand, how to pick a venue and match fights and deal with fighters and coaches so that they have a great experience. I don't have the flashiest shows. I'm not going to lie. I don't invest in a whole lot of, lighting and, special effects and stuff like that. But, we've got, a good cage. We have a decent venue, and we're smooth to work with. And I think that that's why people come back to fight for us. And, we choose small venues that are a great fan experience and run a pretty decent show, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I always say people don't show up for the lights; they show up for the fights. But that
Exactly.
is
I
MMA,
see it.
especially on the local scene, is supposed to be in a small venue, hot, sweaty. People are on top of each other. It gets crazy in there. You feel the adrenaline and the testosterone. Like if you're in a big cavernous venue, it's hard to recreate that atmosphere. So I always enjoy the small venue shows, or at least small-ish venue. Like OCL has been doing shows at the Columbus Athenaeum the last couple shows, and even though it's a small venue, the seats feel like they go straight up to the ceiling because it's an old
Yeah.
old venue, and and the fans feel like they're right on top of you, like it's almost like an old Coliseum arena type setting. But yeah, I feel like that's the best thing. I mean, for as long as I've been covering MMA, I've been to shows all over Ohio and every different corner, and those are the shows I feel like that are special. So I haven't been to one of your shows, but I definitely got to get out to one of them here sooner rather than later. I was hoping to go to the March one, but I actually was out of town. But next one, I'm going to make it too. Yeah, man, I'm excited for this fight. Like I said, I feel like Ego Fight Series, Johnny Connor and crew, they've been putting on a good amount of shows. I know they do boxing as well, and looks like the card and I see. I think there's at least 7 fights so far on the card, and everyone that have seen that has fought is tough fighters. You've of course got a lot of demolition fighters, a lot of Fightopia, Smileback Training Center, that's what you're going to get from those gems. But yeah, man,
Mhm.
I'm excited for it, man. Anything else you got to mention? Any sponsors? Any of that fun stuff?
Yeah, no, my primary sponsor, refreshmybed.com. They've really invested in me. So, I'm really invested in them, really appreciate the support that they're giving me. And then just my team. I have the best training partners. Gary's the best coach. My jiu-jitsu coach, Justin Kennedy, he's really done just as much as Gary has in, getting me to believe in myself and my ability. So to Justin and to Gary, forever grateful. Like I mentioned, all the training partners that I have in all weight classes at all levels. My job, I have a very supportive job, that allows me to do this, because I know that can be an interesting dynamic to navigate. And then my family, my wife sacrifices a lot. My wife is the best. She gives me, everything that I need to be stress-free, train and, do the things that I want to do. And, I try to, be the same for her. All around, I just have so much support between family, friends, the team, people who believe in me and are rooting for me to keep going, and just ride this wave. Because, I'm 36, I'll be 37 this year. I'm not getting any younger, but I don't feel old, which is why, I'm going to keep going. When I feel old, or, when I get up in the morning and I don't want to go to the gym, or, I have a hard day and it takes me 2 weeks to recover when it took me a day to recover before, then that'll be time for me to stop. But I don't feel like that, man. I feel good, and every reason to be excited for this fight and the fights after it. So.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I'm on the other side of 32, and it's I feel like you realize you start having to take care of yourself, and then it's like, okay, actually, you do the right things, and then you can have some longevity, which is I feel like that's you feel good and you feel right, and you feel like you're doing the right things, and then you're a little bit you're successful in your life too, and then the fighting and that part of it can be on the side as well. So I'm excited for this fight, excited for the card. June 15th, Ego Fight Series 3 at Hobart Arena in Troy, Ohio. Awesome arena, by the way. That's a cool venue. Like I said, I was hoping to be able to go to this one. I'm going to get out of town on this one too. So I'm going to have to
I was
start
going to
talking
ask if you were going to be there. I've looked at Hobart before. It's expensive, man. Shout out to them for booking the arena and taking the risk, because I've looked into it before and I'm like, nope. So it's going to be fun.
It's awesome. Yeah, I don't know that there's been. I can't remember the last time there was an event in like Troy. I know there was one in Piqua, I think, but Troy is cool. It's right outside of Dayton and pretty easy to get to. I think it's like right off the highway. So hopefully they get a good crowd. Like I said, it looks like a good fight card so far. So I know it'll be streaming as well, and we'll have it on Ohio MMA News, all that information. But yeah, man, June 15th. Check him out, Matt Comer. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
We'll be back next week with another.